Hey class, today we're going to talk about narrow transcription and what that means and some diacritic marks, IPA marks and notations that you'll be learning about. So let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so we talked about broad transcription before, and that's mainly what we have been doing so far is transcribing sounds and words into IPA. But what we're going to be talking about is narrow transcription and how that differs from broad transcription. So narrow transcription is referring to us using what's called diacritic notations. And when you see it, if you're using broad, you will see these brackets. If you're doing narrow transcription or reading a research report or another speech therapist report, you will see these brackets used if narrow transcription is being used. So why do we do narrow transcription? One reason we might do it is to account for co-articulation. And we've talked about this a little bit. So when we are producing sounds in words, for example, or even in syllables, the sounds that are adjacent to each other can influence how we produce the sound. So, for example, if you say the word key, um, you were anticipating that high vowel E. So your articulators are already moving into position as you are saying the k. Now, k is a back sound, right? But you are moving your tongue further forward when you make it because you're anticipating that high vowel. Coop, when you say coop, to compare it, we have that low vowel. And often when we're doing speech therapy, we want to, I mentioned this before, use targets that are easier for children to make so they don't have that large transition from front to back, for example. When we have also some sounds that are adjacent, such as we've talked quite a bit about nasal sounds. When they're adjacent to vowels, you produce that vowel with a nasal quality. So if I say can, it doesn't sound the same as if I say cat. That vowel sounds different, right? Also, we talked a lot about R influence to vowels. So your vowels will have an R or rhoticized quality to them if they are adjacent to an R or a RF sound. Okay. So we don't necessarily spend a lot of time using narrow transcription for things that are typical. So the co-articulation examples that we just gave, there's really not a reason to be transcribing that because it's considered typical in our language. The reason that we would use narrow transcription is really to identify when there's a difference. So if someone is nasalizing sounds that should not be nasalized, beyond what is typical for co-articulation, we're going to note that. We want to note it for speech sound disorders. We also want to note it for dialect differences. So some of you may have watched the Boston car commercial that I posted, where if you are from the Boston area, you drop your R's and you produce a vowel. So you say, going to park my car at Harvard. That's a dialect difference. So if you transcribe that, you might want to note the dialect difference for those vowels, not necessarily say that that person has a speech sound disorder. And this is true for someone who's learning English as a second language. We want to make sure that we are not over-referring children who have English being influenced by their primary language. That's considered a difference, not a disorder. So we want to note that with diacritics. Okay. These are really helpful charts in your books. You do not have to memorize them. I don't have this memorized. But you should be familiar with some of the more frequently occurring notations that we're going to use. So I'm going to talk about these and I've highlighted them in your slides here. So as I mentioned, nasalized is something that we know about from co-articulation with vowels, but if someone is nasalizing many sounds when they're producing them, that's going to be a sign that something else is occurring, and often structurally something else is occurring. So for example, someone with cleft palate. Um, labelize, also nasal emission for someone with a cleft palate, you're going to see that, or someone with velopharyngeal dysfunction, where that velopharyngeal port is not working. You're going to see this and you're going to want to note it because that may require further evaluation for that person. Sometimes you'll see labelized consonants. So sometimes if a child is working towards learning the proper articulation for a sound, they may not necessarily be substituting a sound, but they may be distorting it. Often we say they distorted the sound. So we may use this one. Dentalized, if they have a lisp, sometimes we may use this if we suspect that some of the sounds are produced with the tongue in a dentalized position when it shouldn't be. Likewise, if they have a lateral lisp, it's a different type of lisp than dental lisp, interdental lisp. Lateralized means that air is coming over and it gives the sound like a slushy quality. So they might sound like slushy when they use say their s's and their sh's and other fricative sounds. So that would be a lateral lisp. Rhoticized, that's something which could be typical. If they're working towards producing their R's, they may not quite reach the target, but it may have a rhoticized coloring or value to it, meaning that they're getting closer to meeting it, but they didn't quite meet the articulation target for the different versions of the sound. Glottalized is something that we talk about often for young children, that they will glottalize their sounds until they learn them. But at a certain point, we don't want to see this for a large majority of sounds. We can also see this with children with cleft palate. And then these here at the bottom, breathy, whistled, and well, let's talk about breathy and whistled. So again, related to velopharyngeal disorders or palate, or even if your adenoids or tonsils are swollen, you may have a nasal quality or a breathy quality, or whistle because air is coming out of the nasal cavity when it should be coming only out of the oral cavity. Trilled would be an example. So we don't trill our R's typically in English, but in other languages, R's are trilled, such as Italian or Spanish. So that would be something that we want to note as a dialect difference versus a disorder, for example. So this is just a summary of what we just talked about. If a child's using a nasal quality, we definitely want to use the diacritic symbol for that. We want to note if with some of these symbols, if it's a dialect difference versus an actual disorder. We want to note whether a sound is distorted or whether it's not, or whether it's a complete substitution. So for example, one of the symbols for rounding, if it's a sound that shouldn't be rounded, then so lots of times kids will substitute the w sound for the sound, but maybe they're not doing a complete substitution. Maybe it's just that they haven't quite got their mouth retracted enough to make the sound that they're trying to make. As I mentioned, lateral lisps don't resolve on their own. So if we notice lateralization for fricatives and affricates, we would want to note that and perhaps, do further assessment to see if the child has a lateral lisp. And likewise, if they're dentalizing those sounds, we want to see if maybe they have an interdental lisp. Now, the other nice chart that's in your book is this chart which organizes the different diacritic symbols based on whether it's nasal quality or rounding. These are all based on where the tongue should be positioned. These are pausing symbols. And then down here are symbols that we use for vocal quality. So we talked about vocal quality, right? When we were talking about prosody. So these are more the mechanical vocal quality that we might be concerned about. So we said that if someone is using, someone may just have a breathy quality. So you think about famous people in history, Marilyn Monroe had a very breathy quality when she spoke. That was just how she spoke. That was her personal type of speech. But if someone's breathy because they have a physical impediment that they cannot have their velopharyngeal port closed properly, for example, then that's a different issue, right? Same with whistles and trills. So if you're doing what's an oral mech exam and as a speech therapist and evaluating someone's structures, you're going to be listening for their vocal quality and you're going to be noting this if this is off. Okay. So I will say, I'm going to end the show. I will say that when you are a busy speech therapist with 55 kids on your caseload, you may not be using these diacritic symbols frequently. So we see them in research reports. If you're someone in a medical setting, for example, you're working with children with cleft palate, you're going to see them a lot more than you would in your garden variety school speech therapist caseload. So you should just be aware of that, that is the reality. Okay, well, I will see you in class. Bye.